So you can start, Lek.
Okay, let me share my screen again. Where are we? Here we go. Share. Okay. So as I said earlier, at any point, if you have any questions, please unmute yourself and just interrupt me or put your hand up. I can't see everyone's screen, so that's why I said unmute yourself and just interrupt me, because I can't see everyone everyone's screen with hands or anything like that. So because this session is supposed to be interactive, we want you to get the answers that you have to the questions that you have. So the idea of this first introductory kind of session is to give you the basics of how Canada works, the structures. So what we are going to be doing is we're going to be missing out on some of the important kind of aspects of Canada, like our history with the French, for example, or with the Indigenous peoples of this land. Not to because they're not important, but just because today is just about getting to the structure of how Canada actually works. And so let's get started. So as you see, this country of ours is broken up into a bunch of different provinces and territories, and they can our country can be described in many different ways. And I'm going to start with, let's get going here. Oop. Okay, let's start with constitutional monarchy. Some of these words are big words that may sound kind of intimidating, but you know, if we break them down, it'll be a lot more easy to understand. So Canada is a constitutional monarchy. What does this mean? So let's break it down. Constitutional refers to the laws of the land. These are the agreements that when Canada became a country, these are the agreements of the territories that were involved with this country. And at that time, it was just, you know, Ontario, Quebec, and a couple of the eastern provinces that got together and came up with an idea of Canada. And so the Constitution really is all of our laws. It really describes how the government interacts with us, how we interact with each other legally. It also refers to all of our rights and our freedoms. A Charter of Rights and Freedoms is in our Constitution. So this is kind of the big law of the land, and it doesn't change no matter what government comes in that we vote in. The Constitution always remains the same. Now, monarchy refers to really our history with the English. And today, the actual head of state, the head of the state of Canada, is King Charles III. It used to be Queen Elizabeth, but King Charles is actually the head of the state of Canada. Of course, he's a pretty busy guy. So,
busy guy?
I'm sorry? Anita, did you want to ask a question?
No, no question. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. So, you know, he oversees, or he's the king of many different places around the world. Actually, 16 different countries have King Charles as their king, including Canada. So he is represented, he can't be everywhere. So he has representatives in the different countries that he's the king in. And in our country, that's the Governor General. So and largely this relationship, the relationship that the king has with Canada, is largely ceremonial. He really doesn't make too many decisions. So, you know, it's important for this to be part of the discussion only because it exists. Although, like I said, it's very ceremonial. There's not a lot that the king actually can do in our country. The people who actually make the decisions in our country are in this next description of what Canada is. So Canada is also a parliamentary democracy. So if we take those two words, let's break them down again. So parliamentary refers to the system that we use. So how we make the laws, who makes the laws, the systems that create how we interact. And democracy obviously refers to our way of achieving a government. So we, the people, this is where our role comes in. So we all vote and we bring in a government, and that's the democracy part. And of course, democracy, is different in different areas of the world that it's used. So democracy is on a spectrum. So we can have a longer discussion about democracy afterwards, but generally, I think we all have an understanding of what democracy is. And so the prime minister is the head of our government, okay, not the head of our state. Okay, the state is King Charles. He remains always, no matter what government we vote in. But our prime minister is voted in by us. And actually, the prime minister is a simple MP, a member of parliament, that is voted in an area like Markham, for example. We have 3 ridings in Markham, 3 federal ridings in Markham. Justin Trudeau, our prime minister today, is an MP in a riding in Montreal. And so he is actually the one that is the head of government. Okay. So our next slide here. So the Constitution is up at the top. This is the rules of the land. Okay. The monarchy is next because that monarchy never leaves. That's the head of state. And now below the monarchy there's 3 branches of our government. And this is so the first branch is our legislative branch. Now, the legislative branch refers to our 2 houses. So we have a Senate, which is here, and we have a House of Commons. Now, the Senate is where all of our senators are. Now, senators are not elected by us. They're actually appointed by the prime minister. Okay, so that house is called the upper house. Okay, this is really interesting because this is historical. And the House of Commons, where all of our MPs sit, so these are the people that we vote in federally. Okay, they're called members of parliament. That's what MP means. And they sit in what's called the lower house, which is very interesting. So Commons, House of Commons means the house of the people. That's how it would, if you were to interpret it in a different way. It's a house of the people. And the senators is the upper house, and that's traditionally was where all the economic elite would be. And the senators all represent different areas of the country fairly. However, they are appointed. So this is where things have changed dramatically in our country because they do not have the power that they used to have. Okay, so what happens is in our next branch, which is called the executive branch, okay, this is who makes all the decisions. Okay, it's our prime minister, who's the head of government, and his cabinet, which are the people he appoints to head different areas of interest in Canada, different ministries, we call them. So the Minister of Health, for example, the Minister of Environment, the Minister of International Affairs, Intergovernmental Panel. There's a whole bunch of ministries that we have. And they are the ones who actually create the law. They take that law, they bring it to the House of Commons, okay? The House of Commons then votes on that law, whether it should be passed or not. And if they approve it, it then goes to the Senate, okay? And then the Senate has to approve it as well. Now, again, just like the monarchy, the Senate is largely symbolic. They may have suggestions sometimes when laws are created saying, maybe this law needs a little bit of tweaking here and there. We have to change it just a little bit. And they'll send that law back to the House of Commons for our MPs to debate it and to upgrade it. But every law has to be passed by the Senate. Okay, so when the Senate passes it and it's ready for approval, who do you think is the last person to sign? Anybody? Here's where the symbolic comes in. That is our governor general, the king. He's the last person to say, okay, it meets the requirements of our constitution, and I will sign it. But again, that's largely symbolic. Does this make sense? Does anybody have any questions so far?
Let me ask you one question.
Sure.
So you were talking about the Senate, they no longer have the power that they used to be. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, you think?
Oh, that's interesting. I think, honestly, you know, the way our country is set up, I think it's a good thing. However, if we were to make changes and alterations to how our processes work, I think that it's redundant, and we probably don't need it. Because again, it's largely symbolic now. They are overseers. They do look at laws and they scrutinize them, but that is also done in the House of Commons, the people's house, right? Our house, where our representatives, you know, they represent our values, right? So when we vote for somebody, we hope that that person is going to represent what we believe in the lower house, in Parliament, in the House of Commons. So all the real work is done at the executive branch and in the House of Commons. The Senate is really just an approval process at this point.
So somebody asked a question, how many people, how many senators in the upper house?
Oh, how many senators? I should know that number, but it's in the 200s. It's about 280, I believe, or 240, somewhere in there, but I could find that out easily. And I'll get to that. So it is supposed to represent all of Canada too. So Senate, you know, the senators are not just picked out of whim. The Prime Minister appoints them. And, you know, there has been, you know, the odd case where the Senate has too many conservative people in it or too many liberal people in it, because we've only had conservative and liberal governments. So those liberal and conservative prime ministers that we have, you know, they have biases. They're going to put into place people who have the same understandings as they do, or same values as they do. So it can be tricky sometimes passing laws if they are too extreme, let's say, and there's too many, and there's you know, less liberal, let's say, Senate representatives. They should be independent, really. That's how it should be. But we all know that, you know, there is bias because they are being chosen by a prime minister, right? Who is a prime minister of a particular party. So they have biases. If Senate was in the United States, there's a Senate as well, right? Those senators in the United States are actually voted. We get the people of the United States get to vote who their senator is. We don't have that in Canada. So that's why I kind of said they're mainly symbolic, because most of the decision making really comes from the executive branch, which is our prime minister and all of his cabinet, who make those big decisions and then bring it to the House of Commons. Let's get an example of that. Okay. So what law has been passed recently? Okay, let's say when CERB came out during COVID, okay, where the government said we are going to give this much money to everybody to get through COVID who's having problems. That idea came from the Prime Minister and from the executive branch, but it had to be passed in the House of Commons. There had to have been at least 50% of the MPs that agreed with that law, and which they did. So in the case that we have right now, we have what's called a minority government. Our current government, Liberal government, doesn't have enough seats to pass law on its own. It has to team up with another party right now, which they're doing with the NDP, right? And so the NDP and the Liberals had enough seats in the House, more than 50%, to be able to pass that CERB law, for example. Okay, so that's kind of how it works. Now there's another, the next branch
according to the Canadian website, it says that we have 105 senators.
105. Okay. I thought it
And
was
then-
in the 200s. Okay.
Yeah,
So
we should have roughly about what was it, the 130 some odd MPs?
No, 332,
330
I
then.
believe. Yeah, 300,
something.
332, something like that. It changes. That changes because our population changes, right? And we don't want to have communities that have less representation, I should say, than others. So generally, like the big cities like Toronto, for example, they'll have about 100 to 120,000 people in one riding. But there's some rural places that have very low populations, but big area that may have only 20, 25,000 people. So there is a little bit of a discrepancy on representation, but generally we try to make it as fair as possible. And that's why it increases. You know, in the beginning of the 2000s, for example, we only had 304 seats. Then it went to 308 and then the 316. And today it's in the 330s, just because our population continues to grow. And we want to keep that ratio the same.
Sorry, Nick.
I'm sorry?
I have a question.
Sure.
Why do we have that many senators? Who decided to have that many of them?
Okay,
Why do we have so many?
It's historical. So again, with Senate changed too, as our population grew. But again, this is part of this our parliamentary democracy that I was talking to you about. So Parliament is that legislative branch. Okay, it's all of this actually. It's executive branch, the judicial. This is all part of what's called Parliament, and it comes really from our history of England being a part of England at one time, or a colony of England, because that was their system. So we basically adopted the system from England and brought it here. And like I said, in the beginning of Canada, you know, we had a House of Commons and people got to vote, but not everybody. Women weren't allowed to vote. People who didn't own a business or didn't own property were not allowed to vote. So you know, in the beginning days of Canada, it was very much governed by and for the economic elite. It wasn't really about the people. You know, even though we were called a democracy at the time, there's not too many people who had access to this democracy, right? So that changed over time. Right. You know, women were allowed to vote in the early 1900s. That came in. You know, Indigenous people weren't allowed to vote up until the 60s, the 1960s. Actually, Chinese Canadians were not allowed to vote in Canada until the 1960s. You know, there are areas, you know, municipally, okay, we're talking about federal government here, but municipally, it was 1970, believe it or not, in our lifetime, most of our lifetimes, that no one could vote in a municipal election unless you owned property. Okay, if you rented a home, you're not allowed to vote. So that changed in 1970. So things are becoming more democratic as the years have gone on. But how about I finish this one slide and then we'll get back into that, because I have a feeling that you may have other questions when you see the next slide. So
well, we have another question actually.
Sure. Okay.
About whether there are NDPs and conservative people in the cabinet.
No. So our system doesn't allow for that. So one of the things that Mimi and I we have spoken about when we thought about doing this was conveying how our voting system works and the way we elect our MPs. And the current system that we have is called first past the post, which basically means whoever gets the most votes wins. However, there has been some problems with that, because if you have, for example, 4 different parties and, you know, 3 of them get, you know, 20% and the other one gets 40%, the guy with, or woman or whoever with 40% wins, but there's 60% of people who are not represented in that win, right? So the current government that we have right now, and how it works is whoever is the prime minister or the winning party, the party that has the most seats, they hold the prime ministerial position and will also hold all the cabinet positions. Again, we have a minority government right now. We haven't gotten into this yet, but I hope you all understand what that means. But a minority government means that the current government didn't get enough seats to hold a majority to pass laws all on its own. So that's why there is a partnership right now between the Liberals and the NDP. However, in our system, it doesn't allow our prime minister would never have anyone other than his own party as a cabinet minister, okay, because of how uncooperative, let's say, our system is right now. The only cooperation we get is, with what we have right now with the NDP and the Liberals. They made a little deal saying we won't have an election if you do this, let's say. And so what Jagmeet Singh did, for example, in Canada, was he asked for dental care and that agreement apparently is going to happen. It hasn't happened yet, but that's the only thing keeping the current government in power. Does that answer the question? I think was it Ednita that asked that question?
No, that was Ping Ping.
Oh, Ping Ping. Okay.
Thank you, Nick.
Oh, you're welcome. So did that answer your question though? It's a little confusing right now because we're.
Yes,
Okay.
I got it.
Okay, great. Okay, well, let's just talk about the last branch of government. Okay, there's 3 branches. Okay, we talked about the legislative, we talked about the executive. Now we have the judicial branch, which is all of our courts, our court systems. Now you'll notice that there's no arrow on top of that branch of government. That's because the judicial branch is independent from all the other branches. And the reason why is because they can't be influenced by the others. They basically take the constitution that we have, the laws of the land, and they interpret them when there are disputes. Okay, and now the highest court in our country is called the Supreme Court of Canada. So if there's a law, so let's say the province, because there's lower courts as well, federal, provincial, and territorial, and let's say somebody has an issue around something that may be associated to the Constitution. Let's say adoption. Somebody wants, this has come up, for example, an adoptee, somebody who was adopted, wanted to know who their parents were, but were not being allowed. They weren't giving that information. So that person went to the provincial court and said, I want my records. And she had to go to court, and the court said, well, you have a right to see your records, but I can't give it to you. You have to go to the higher court, to the Supreme Court. So they went to the Supreme Court, and there she actually lost. And she still doesn't have her records. But that's an example of how our system works. There's a hierarchy in the court system.
It's a very interesting example that you had there. Like, under what circumstances that person who wants to know who her or his parents were would actually lost that right?
Yeah, well, it's traditional or it's conventional, right? Like it came from the past. So there's a lot of laws on our books that are very, very old.
Like the emergency acts that we had, hey?
Right. Oh, the Emergency Act, I mean, that actually came in not too long ago in the 1980s, actually, when we changed our constitution, because you see, we were part of we were under we couldn't make laws without getting approval from England up until 1980, when we decided as a people that we want our own constitution. We don't want to be under England anymore. We want to make our own rules, and we don't want to have England's approval before we have our own rules in our own country. So in 1980, we came out with a new constitution, which included something that's really important to every one of us, and that's called our rights and freedoms. So all of our rights and freedoms, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, came into only in 1980, so not too long ago. And before that, we were really under British rule. So we had to use their laws, not our own laws, even though we have grown into someone different than England, right? We have our own ideas about how we want to interact with one another and how we want our government to interact with us, and so the Emergencies Act came in because of instability that was happening in Canada at one time. So that law came in, and it was voted on by our MPs, and it was approved, and became part of our rules or our laws, let's say, in Canada, or the ability to use that law in our country. Does that answer the question, Mimi?
Yeah, and I do think I have memory of Clarkson, our past Governor General, Ng Bingji. She had actually talked about, she was actually one of the people going through putting in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom.
Yes, because we had to get approval from our king. So, I mean, again, it was largely ceremonial because there was no dispute.
Our
the
queen
king's
at that time.
Oh, our queen. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, Queen Elizabeth. So there really was no dispute. I mean, she essentially just signed off. So there was no back and forth, let's say, no negotiations. We said what we wanted. We put it to her, and she signed it and said, okay. So that's how that worked. I mean, there is a movement in Canada to abolish the monarchy, to get rid of this, because it is largely symbolic. It does actually cost us, every single one of us. We pay the king and queen or queen every single year. They get money from us taxpayers, like from Canadians. So, and really, what is their influence in Canada? Do you think you felt a connection with the monarchy? Do you ever feel like that that's a lot of people, to be quite honest with you, when I tell them that the king or queen of England is our head of state, they're like, no, you can't. What do you mean? What are you talking about? I thought we were our own country. So people are pretty surprised that the king is our king. But it is so because of our history. Okay. So is there any more questions when it comes to this kind of this area of our parliamentary governance? Because that's what this is here. That's what refers to parliament, all of this. Okay, we'll go on to the next slide, so another way, so Canada has many faces and many ways to describe itself. This one here is probably the most important, because this outlines our relationship, the province's relationship with the federal government, and the federal government's relationship with the province. Okay, so what we have when we wrote that constitution back in 1867, it really was an agreement between, at the time there were colonies, but today we call them provinces, by a few provinces. They came together and said, okay, you know what? We're going to work independently, but we're going to work under the umbrella of a country. And this country is, this system is of relationship is called a federation. Okay. Which is basically a union or an agreement between territories to work together to accomplish the best that they can. So in this federation, there is a division of powers. Okay, so the federal government takes care of certain things, the provincial government takes care of other things. Okay, So let's just start with the federal government, okay? So the federal government takes care of, here's a bunch of things that they take care of. As you can see, it's mail, postal services, of course, taxes and money and banking. This should really say banking because taxes and money, also there's provincial taxes as well, right? But shipping, railways, and pipelines, that's kind of, and even broadcasting and telecom, those are all things that go over borders, right? So they're not just happening in one province. So when you're shipping something from Ontario to BC, that has to go through a whole bunch of different provinces. So that's why it's under the federal government's mandate. Okay, that's why they take care of that. Same with telecom, right? And internet connect, like what we're on right now. There could be somebody on our internet from around the world or from another province. So because there's a crossing of the border of a province, that's why the federal government takes care of it. Okay, so they take care of waterways, for example. Okay, so if there's, let's say, Lake Ontario or the St. Lawrence River, that's under the jurisdiction of the federal government. Other things, of course, foreign affairs, our national defense, those sort of things. They also take care of employment insurance. Okay, so when if you lose your job and you need help, they have this system called employment insurance, which is standard across the country. Same with CPP. CPP is Canada Pension Plan. So this is our old age pension. This is something that's been standardized across the country. And so it's the same in every province. And of course, Indigenous lands and Indigenous rights. They take care of everything having to do really with Indigenous dealings, let's say. So when it comes to the province, now the province delivers education, healthcare, social services. These are the things that are closest to us, right? These are the things that really affect us as individuals and as communities, right? Education, healthcare, social services, local roadway and regulations. So we have in Canada 13 different healthcare systems. We don't have one system. We have 13 because we have 10 provinces and three territories. Now the territories and so we have one national healthcare system that only takes care of some. So the federal government has a healthcare system and they take care of Indigenous people. They take care of federal prisons, for example, the people that are in federal prisons, the military. All those people get military healthcare, and that's all done through the federal healthcare system, which is different from the Ontario healthcare system, right? Our healthcare system. OHIP, does everybody know what OHIP is or what it refers to? OHIP refers to our social, how we pay for healthcare in Ontario. So it's the Ontario. That's what the O is for. But OHIP doesn't have anything to do with Quebec. It doesn't have anything to do with Alberta or Saskatchewan or any of the other provinces. We all have 13 different systems. That's the way our country works. Now, there is a relationship between the federal government and the provincial government when it comes to education and healthcare and social services. And that is that they fund some of it. Right? Some of the money that goes to pay for our education system, our healthcare system, that's a shared cost from the federal government and the provincial government. We could talk a lot about that because things have changed quite a bit in the last 30 years when it comes to funding certain social services like education or healthcare. And it's very important that we know about this because right now in Ontario, for example, we're going through some very, very big changes in our healthcare system. And each and every one of us should be aware of this because it affects every one of us, right? And we have to, we as the people should either agree or disagree with this. And so it's important that we know about it. But so there was a time, for example, in the 1990s and the 80s that healthcare was 50-50 split. The federal government paid for half and the province paid for half. Okay. The federal government only would do that if the provinces abided by the standards that they came up with. So we have what's called the Canada Health Act, okay, which is a law that says how healthcare, the minimum standard of healthcare should be in all the provinces. Okay, and the two biggest aspects of that are access. Everybody should have access, and universality, meaning everybody gets this. Okay, everybody gets healthcare. If you're sick, doesn't matter who you are in this country, you should have access to our healthcare system. So things have changed, and we'll get into that later. The reason what we're doing today is really an overall view of the structures, but what we would like to do in the future is talk about the aspects of what we're talking about today in the context of what you want to hear and what you want to know about. So if it's healthcare that you want to talk about, let's talk about it. If it's education, or some things that aren't on here, for example, transportation and transit. Okay, those are also areas that are delivered by the province, but funded also by the federal government. So we're talking about, public transit system, that we have in our roads, our highways, that sort of thing. And now you'll notice we're under provincial, you see municipalities, right? It's not a separate government, even though we all think it's a separate government, and we do vote separately for our municipal representatives. It is really under the purview of provincial government. Okay, so the provincial government can say how the municipalities are going to run. Okay, because they're really the boss. The province is the boss. The municipalities are just like an arm of the province. And the province has some pretty important things to the municipalities have some pretty important things to take care of, right? They're the things that are the most closest to us, right? Our garbage collection, the water we drink, all the public infrastructure that's local, let's say to Markham, right? Oh, the community center that we're in, okay? Community centers, hockey arenas, or whatever, other recreational arenas, libraries, those are under municipalities. Local police, they're actually written here, community water system. And so we've also gone through some pretty big changes here as well in the last, I'd say 10 to 30 years. As you know, I don't know if you know this, but recently the Ford government, who's in charge right now of our province, made some changes to the powers that mayors now have, only in two places, Toronto and Ottawa. They've given them what's called veto rights, which basically says that the mayor doesn't have to have 50% of the support of their council anymore. He or she only needs 1/3, right? Which isn't very democratic, but this has happened. So this is another discussion we could be having too. So, I mean, there's lots to talk about when it comes to the system. But really, this is the structure. This is the bones of our country. And like I said, when we first started, this excludes a lot of stuff. We're not talking about our history, and why this is the way it is. We have a history with the French. We have a huge history with Indigenous peoples in this country as well. We're not talking about that today. This is really just the structure, the bones of our system. Whether you agree or disagree with some of how it is, or this is how it is. So we can now open it up and talk about any of the aspects of governance here to you. I would love to hear your feedback and your questions, or even your comments, even just comments on this system. We haven't talked about voting, which is very important. And hopefully in a future session, we can get really into voting, because I think that is probably the most important aspect of governance that never gets talked about. And Mimi is is a big advocate of representation. And so she understands quite well why it is so important that we talk about voting and our voting system, and perhaps even other voting systems around the world, and whether we should try to look at other places and see how they're doing things and whether they're getting better representation than we are. Because the fact is our system, first past the post, was what we call it. This is the way we choose our representation. Is very, very old. It's very, very old. It goes back to the beginning of our country. And there's really only 3 democracies in the world that still use this system. And I'm sure that you could probably guess the 3 other than us. That would be England and the United States. Most other democracies have changed. They've evolved because, as you could see, for example, in our last municipal election, we only had 28% voter turnout. That means, 72% of people did not even bother voting. And that's a problem. That's a problem in a democracy because, especially a capitalist democracy that we're in, because in capitalist democracies, you can buy things, and you don't want a government to be buying power, right? But we're getting at with these low voter turnouts, we're risking that. So that's a discussion that needs to happen. So having said all that, does anybody have any questions about what we've talked about so far? Anyone? Or even comments like, what is it that intrigues you the most about this? Or what area still confuses you maybe? Anybody?
I actually never knew that the municipal is really under the provincial level. I just thought that they are different.
Yeah. So
And
see, municipalities, here's the story with municipalities. Okay. So Markham, for example, right? Or Toronto or Ottawa, or these are all municipalities, cities. Way back when they started, they had only one thing that they could do to be able to deliver all of this stuff. Okay, like libraries and community centers and roads, local roads and water and garbage pickup. They were only allowed to use one tax, property taxes, right? So they asked all of their residents to pay a certain amount of money to bring a certain level of service. And it's not the same. Every single municipality is different. So I'll give you an example. In Toronto, does anybody know that Toronto amalgamated about 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago? Do you know what that means? So Toronto, the city, was much, much smaller 15 years ago, okay? It was only the downtown part. That was Toronto. And Toronto today is made up of 5 different places. Toronto, Etobicoke used to be its own city. Scarborough used to be its own city. North York used to be its own city. And East York used to be its own city. We had a provincial government who said, you know what? That's too inefficient. We're going to have only one government, or municipal government. We're going to merge all of these 5 governments and put them under one name, and that name is going to be Toronto. Okay, so that happened about 15 years ago. Now, when it happened, the interesting thing was, like I said, every municipality had their own ideas and their own standards, right? So, for example, Toronto was the most progressive. They charged the most taxes, but they were also paid their employees more. I'll give you an example of that. So, students work as lifeguards, right, at our pools in our community. So Toronto paid those students $10 an hour, okay? But Etobicoke and Scarborough didn't believe in paying that much money to their students to be a lifeguard. They only paid $6 an hour, okay? But when we merged, What do you think happened? Oh no, we got all these different people making different money. We had to now bring it all together, right? And of course, it all went to the top, right? It all went. Everybody wanted more money. They didn't want. We weren't going to get all the Toronto lifeguards to make $6 an hour now. So, and it took a long time. As a matter of fact, we're still going through this problem of merging all of these 5 different municipalities into one. The municipalities all argued, no, we don't want this. We want to be our own municipality. But the province is the boss. If they said that it's going to happen, it happened. And that government had a majority government. That government took that idea to its parliament, okay, because the same system that we saw earlier, we also in federal government, we also have in provincial government, okay? So that same system is also in provincial government as well. So we have, the federal government, with all those things that I showed you in the last slide, that same thing could be mirrored as in the province as well. So that government at the time had the power to really make this happen, regardless of what any municipality wanted or didn't want, right? Another thing that happened about 20 years ago is that municipality did what's called downloading. So it gave the responsibility, let's say, to housing. We have social housing for people who are in disabilities or people who are having a hard time in life and they need some help for housing. So it used to be the province that took care of that, right? And what did they do? They downloaded it onto the municipalities to take care of. So it used to be called Ontario Housing. Now it's called municipal housing, right? So, but the problem is that municipalities were only given one way to tax, and that's property taxes. It was never meant to pay for housing, for example. That was a provincial, that was the federal government and the provincial government that was supposed to pay for that. Now it's put on the shoulders of the municipalities. They couldn't keep up. They couldn't, in Toronto alone, for example, there's something like 20,000 units that are available, but they're so bad in disrepair. They're so bad, in such bad shape that nobody could live in them. Believe it or not, right now we have almost 20,000 residents that are boarded up because we don't have the money to pay to fix them so that people can actually live in them. And that's because the province downloaded onto municipalities, and the municipalities just couldn't pay for it. Unless what mayor is going to raise your property taxes by 200%? No mayor is going to do that, right? No mayor is going to do that because he knows that he's not going to get elected again if he does that. But that's really the only way to pay for this. That's because that's all they have. That's the only power that they have. That's not entirely true because during when all this was happening, when they did all this downloading, the premier in Ontario recognized that was a problem. And so what did he do at the time? This was Dalton McGuinty. This was going back about 15 years. He told not all the mayors, just the mayor of Toronto, you can choose from this list of 12 taxes. You could choose which ones you want. We're going to give you that power now. So at the time, it was land transfer tax. So, in Toronto, we have a land transfer tax that comes from the province, and we have one that comes from the city of Toronto. We have 2 land transfer taxes. What else? Toronto also chose a car registration tax. So if you have a car in Toronto, you pay an extra $150 a year, something like that. That we don't no longer have anymore because one of our mayors got rid of it for Ford. When we had a Ford as our mayor, he got rid of that tax. What other one? He gave, we owned, at the time it was Mayor Miller. I don't know if everybody remembers, his name is Mayor Miller. He was the mayor at the time. He's the one who chose these new taxes. It wasn't popular, right? Because who likes taxes? Nobody likes taxes. But again, there's just our cities had no way to take care of themselves properly without having more money coming in, more funding coming in. So there's a lot of changes that have happened. This structure that I showed you is supposed to work, but in the last, I would say, 30 years, we've gone through some changes. All democracies, actually, all Western democracies went through these changes, including Canada. I would say, and this is my personal opinion now, so and it may sound political, but these changes that we went through reduced our ability to improve our standard of living. Okay, so government, I believe anyway, should be there to facilitate the best path towards our highest standard of living, right? We want our government to look out for our best interests, our collective best interests, our personal best interests, right? Our family's best interests, us. This is what government is supposed to do. And unfortunately, I think they've made a big mistake. All Western democracies made a big mistake back in the 80s, where things changed. We went from what was called at the time a socialist state, let's say, or different democracies called them different things. Some democracies in England, they called it the welfare state. In the United States, they called it the New Deal, right? But essentially what it was at that time was social provisions. That's when we got healthcare. That's when we got Canada Pension Plan, for example. We never used to have a Canada Pension Plan, our old age pension. That never used to exist until after World War II, okay? Because at that time in democracies were being threatened, right? They were being threatened by communism, socialism, and the capitalists said, hey, we have to do something or we're going to lose our capitalist systems. So they said, okay, we're going to give something to the people to make sure that we can keep going with our capitalism. And what did they do? They gave us healthcare. They gave us the CPP, different provisions, even welfare. Welfare was something that never happened before. It happens today, and it's very minor, but it's there. But what happened in the 1980s is it flipped. It went back the other way, right? And this, you may remember, does everybody remember Ronald Reagan? Yeah, Ronald Reagan from the United States, who's one of the presidents of the United States, the actor. He was the president when Thatcher was the Prime Minister of England. I don't know if you remember that. So, but those two were both had the same ideology and were both the leaders of the two most powerful countries in the world. So they were very powerful. And what they did was they brought in a new ideology around governance that almost every country in the world is now a part of. It's part of our globalization, free trade. We never had free trade around the world, until that time. As a matter of fact, Canada's very first free trade agreement was with the United States in 1980s. It later became with the Mexicans. So now we have the NAFTA, which is all three of us. But we are now a part of 90 different free trade agreements with countries all over the world, either groups of countries or individual countries around the world. And that is all called really globalization. That's what we refer to as globalization, where we've integrated our economies so much that we've become interdependent. So if the US sneezes, we get a cold. If you understand what I'm saying. So yeah. Our economies are very interconnected. Sorry, Anita, did you want to say something? Anita? No? Okay, maybe just...
Are you talking to me?
Yeah, did you want to say something?
That's all right. Yeah. You explain it very clear and in a human way, so very enjoying.
Oh, thank you. Well, please, I want for you to leave with the questions that you have in your head answered. That's the most important. You're the most important part of this, because I don't want you to leave with still questions. So please, if there's something that doesn't make sense to you, ask, please.
I have a question. Then, yeah, when you explained the member of parliament, is that in a short form that is MP, and then there's MPP. Does it mean that is for the municipalities to represent?
That is for the province. So the previous slide here, let me go back again. So this slide here shows the federal kind of structure, okay? The executive, the legislative, and the judicial. We also have this exact same structure in the provinces, okay? So federally, it's our member of parliament, MP. But provincially, it's our MPP, member of provincial parliament. That's what that means, MPP. That's in Ontario. But if you go to BC, they call themselves something different. Okay. Again, that's our federation being our federation, that's this federation part where each province has their own powers. So, things aren't always the same. This is really interesting, our federation, because remember how I was just talking about free trade and how we have free trade with the United States, or we have free trade with whatever country around the world. We don't have free trade amongst provinces. You and I can't buy alcohol from BC. If we if we went on vacation to British Columbia and saw this beautiful wine that British Columbia makes, and we want to take it home, we can't do that. Nope. That's one of the crazy things about our federation. We haven't resolved this. And again, I'm going to sound political again when I say this, and I don't mean to be, but it is the reality. All of our provinces have their own economic elite. I'll put it to you that way. They're billionaires. Ontario has their billionaires that they're watching out for, and BC has their billionaires that they're watching out for, and Quebec has their billionaires. And, this is how our country is, unfortunately. It's like we have, 13 countries within this country. Right. And everybody's looking out for themselves. And that is a problem in our federation. There's no question about it. It's not efficient. I'll give you an example. In our healthcare system, we have 13 healthcare systems, right? And I don't know if any of you have heard of this, but of something called pharmacare, national pharmacare. Have you heard this expression?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
National
no. Okay. National farm. Yeah. So what that refers to is, because we have 13 healthcare systems in Canada, every single one of them buys pharmaceuticals on their own.
Okay.
Okay. So Ontario's the biggest province, so we buy the most. But some of the small provinces, they're buying pharmaceuticals and delivering it to their people that are sick on their own. So we have 13 systems. If we had one system where this is where the term national pharmacare comes in. We've been talking about it for about 20 years. We don't have it today, but we've been talking about it. We could pool our money together and make the costs come down a lot, right? So I don't know if you've heard the expression economy of scale.
Yeah.
What this expression is, okay, you've
bigger hand of negotiation, and then we could make the cost low. Do you mean that?
Exactly. Yeah. If you go into a car dealership and you buy one car, you're probably going to pay more money than if you go into that car dealership and say you want to buy 10 cars.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You get a better price when you buy 10. So this is what can happen with our healthcare systems to make it cheaper for all of us, but also to make sure that we all have coverage. Because right now, unfortunately, in Canada, 1 in 4 Canadians do not have adequate or any access to meds to treat their illness. It's a shameful outcome, but it's a reality right now. And that's why I was saying earlier that, you know, healthcare needs to be a discussion that all of us have. We need to have this discussion, because right now it's being trampled upon. Remember when I was talking about the welfare state? You know, that was when we had the best healthcare system in the world. It covered everybody. Nobody had a problem at all. If you got sick, you were taken care of. As a matter of fact, our healthcare system also used to cover preventative things, you know, like preventative medicine, you know, so you don't get sick. Things like chiropractic or acupuncture or, you know, podiatry, physiotherapy, massage therapy. Those things help you to not get sick, right? We dropped all that stuff. That's no longer covered. You have to have insurance or money out of your pocket to get that, right? So that's just one little aspect of our healthcare system. There's more, but it tells you, in my opinion, that we need to have this discussion, because it's very important. It's us. We're at stake. It's our system, right? And now in our province, it's becoming more and more privatized for profit rather than for results for us, right?
Actually, we have a comment here saying that when it comes to our healthcare system, Justin Trudeau doesn't want to transfer money to provinces.
Yeah, so this is, okay, so when I was talking about Ronald Reagan, do you remember that? Okay. The ideology that he and Margaret Thatcher forwarded is referred to as neoliberalism. Okay, it's a new type of liberalism, neo. That's what neo means. And basically, the concept of that, if I was to put it into words, it's deregulation. Okay, so meaning businesses can do whatever they want. Okay. There's no less oversight, right? So if you're a meat packing company, okay, if you kill animals and you make meat products, you can look after yourself. We're not going to monitor you anymore. You look after yourself. So we lost our federal inspectors. We don't have the people going into a place saying, hey, this place is too dirty. You're going to make people are going to get sick. We don't have them anymore. We allow the companies, the businesses, to do that on their own. And you may say that's a good thing, and they said it was a good thing, but as soon as we did that, I don't know if everybody's familiar with a company called Maple Leaf Foods. Okay, well, Maple Leaf Foods essentially didn't do a good enough job, and 28 people died of E. coli. Thousands of people across Canada got sick. And because we didn't have federal inspectors making sure that they were doing the right job, because food is very important, right?
Mhm.
We want to make sure our food is safe. So we don't have that oversight. So that's deregulation. The second thing is privatization. So anything that is public, let's now put it in the private hands and let them deliver it, right? You can have your opinions about that too. It didn't work so well when it comes to healthcare. I'll put it to you that way, because in Ontario, we used to have 95% publicly funded healthcare system. It was considered at the time the best healthcare system in the world. Everybody had medication. Everybody had, we had 6 beds per 1,000 citizens, okay, which was amongst the highest in the world. In Ontario, we privatized to a point where we're only at 60% public and now 40% private. And what happened? We're facing it today. We went into a pandemic with only 2.3 beds per 1,000 people. Okay. We used to have 6, and when we had 6 beds per 1,000, we had lots more nurses, lots more doctors to be able to handle any kind of influx or any kind of crisis, like a pandemic, for example. Today, we don't have that. in Ontario, we rank 70th in the world for beds per 1,000 citizens. 70th. There's countries like Kazakhstan and Poland, Czech Republic. These are countries much poorer than our countries that have more nurses and doctors and beds in their country. Okay, so this is why I am not for privatization. I think it's a bad move because, again, we'll go back to that word economy of scale, right? If we all put our money together, then guess what? It's going to be cheaper for all of us, right? And we're gonna get the most out of that. So what we've done now is we've taken away some of that, right? We've taken away some of we're only 60% publicly funded now. So now that other 40% of the money that we're putting in through either insurance, okay, because all of us pay health insurance, right? Not all of us. The unfortunate people don't, but there's lots of people who don't. Those people have to pay out of pocket. And even if we do have insurance, we still have to pay out of pocket because we know what insurance companies do. Their first thing that they do is deny. They say no. If you don't argue back, then guess what? They don't pay. If you argue back, maybe they'll pay. So because they're private businesses, they're there to make money. They don't care about anything else but making money. That's what a business is about, right? So when you put that in the public model, it doesn't work. It really doesn't work. It costs more. Let's in healthcare, for example, it costs more. It's less universal, so less accessible to all of us, right? So why would we want something that costs more and is not as good for us? It doesn't make sense. But you see, again, we're going back to that 28% turnout in the voter turnout. You remember we were talking about how many people went out and voted? Not enough people went out to vote. And we're getting governments in power that would do things that they wouldn't do if more people were watching. Right?
So going to that, we had a question, actually, not totally true, but I'll read that regardless. This is a question saying that why does Justin Trudeau give away any amount of money to all the countries and organizations? And because it's our tax money, and it's stated that Stephen Harper didn't do that. So maybe you want to.
Okay. Well, Stephen Harper did do that. Actually, because that's not true. He did it in a different way. He was very much a Christian. So if there was a Muslim organization, I doubt they got any help. If it was a Buddhist organization, or if it was a Sikh organization, they didn't get the help. Christian organizations got the help around the world. And the reason why we do this is there's several reasons why we help out other countries. Number one, Denmark was really good. The country Denmark, their foreign policy is we don't take immigrants. We don't take refugees. But we're going to help the countries that those people are trying to leave so that they don't want to leave, right? So refugees are an issue, where there's war, where there's famine, where there's whatever happening in a place around the world. If we don't help them, more of them will be displaced and will be coming to us and to other nations. So it not just us, but other countries around all Western democracies give a portion of their budget to underprivileged countries. And don't forget, our country and all Western democracies, for that matter, were built on the backs of most of these poor countries. Okay, we took their resources. If you go far enough back, we even took their people and made them slaves. We have a debt to many countries around the world that we exploited to achieve our standard of living, right? Look what's happening with climate change, for example. Let's take that for an example. Okay, so a lot of people will say, you know, have an argument. Well, we're such a small country. Why do we have, what difference is we going to make if we bring down our emissions, right? Well, we've been doing this for 150 years, since the Industrial Revolution. A country like, let's say, like China, a country like China just started to pollute. We got our standard of living by polluting for 150 years. Okay, and it's now everybody in the world's problem, right? China, to bring up the standard of living of its people, just started polluting 30 years ago. They weren't industrial as they are today. And so, yes, they do pollute a lot more than we do. But if you take the per capita, okay, how much we pollute as an individual Canadian compared to an individual Chinese, we pollute still today 10 times more than a Chinese person. If you're doing it one-on-one. Okay, I'm taking the Chinese example, but you could even say this about India, for example. India is another great example because they've been exploited for decades. Okay, they're now becoming a lot more open about their exploitations. Okay, they're becoming very fiercely independent because people are becoming aware of why India is still so poor while England is so rich. Right, their colonizers were so rich, but they took so much from that country. So we have a debt to the world, and to be honest, Canada is not amongst the top 10, let's say, Western democracies that give out. There's others that give out way more than we do. So does that make sense? I mean, it's a moral thing. It's something that's moral. You know, Haiti. Does everybody know the country Haiti? It's a little island that's shares an island with Dominican Republic. It's very close to Canada. It's only 3-hour flight. It's like where Florida is. That is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. There's people there that die of starvation. Okay, we have that 3-hour flight away from here. As a person from Canada who eats a lot anytime I want, it makes me not feel so good to know that there's somebody that's so close to me that is suffering like that. So this is kind of our moral standing when we give to other countries. You know, what's happening in Ukraine right now is a little bit different, right? Because we're not giving money directly, we're giving bombs and whatever armament and stuff like that. You know, there's the argument that we shouldn't be giving all of these money and armament to this country to continue the violence. We should put money into diplomacy, right? We should put right now, the world has spent $1 trillion on bombs and things to give to the Ukraine to continue this war, but they haven't put any money into talking and trying to resolve the differences through diplomacy, through talking it out, saying, hey, you know, how can we do that? And that's what Canada used to be known for. And again, when we changed back in the 80s, the Thatcher and Reagan days, part of neoliberalism is also what's called nationalism, right? So we want just for us. We don't care about any other country. That's what it also breeds, this idea of neoliberalism. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. Does that answer the question, or does it bring more questions?
Well, looks like we get a okay on that. There's no more further question.
Well, you know what? I'd like to ask a question, if you don't mind. What aspects of what we talked about tonight really interested you? That's number one. And were there any aspects of what we talked about tonight that confused you, that didn't give you the information and made you even more confused? I'd love to hear from you, because you know, what you say will help future future discussions that we're having. So if anybody wants to start, go ahead. Anyone? We called this series of talks, we called it a forum. And what a forum means is that it's interactive. So it's a discussion, right? Because again, like I said before, we want this to be about you and about your needs. This is very needs based. So we don't want you to leave without your needs being met. So that's why I really want to hear from you on what maybe we can improve on here. What areas would you like to have a long conversation on, whether it be healthcare or education or social services? Are there areas that you'd like to see or hear about, have a longer discussion? Anything?
Or even if you have any question on anything in the system, I'm sure that we can find out if we don't know about it right now.
Mm.
Or maybe it's just way too much information right now that you have to digest a little bit. You can always email us or leave us a message on Facebook or Instagram, whatever way that you find us, or call to the center, anything like that. So right now we are heading into 9:30. So I think we should.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? I did see one question that I didn't answer here. When it comes to our healthcare system, Mr. Trudeau doesn't want to transfer money. Okay, so
I told you about this.
yeah, I'm sorry. I just seeing it now. So let me answer that, because again, this goes back to the changes. Remember the Reagan and Thatcher? Our prime minister at the time was Mulroney, Brian Mulroney, and he went along with these changes. So what happened in the mid-90s? Healthcare was funded 50-50. In the mid-90s, there were economic problems all over the world. And the World Bank, does everybody know who the World Bank is? The World Bank, they're the bosses of money around the world, let's say. They threatened Canada. They said to Canada, if you don't bring in what's called austerity, okay, meaning if you don't stop spending so much money, we're going to charge you more interest on what the money that you owe. So in the mid-90s, the federal government cut transfers of healthcare to all the provinces by 30%. Can you imagine? 1 year, it's one amount, and then the next year it's cut so much. So this was the beginning of the changes in healthcare that we're seeing today, the ramifications of those changes today. That ideology of cutting and privatizing and all that stuff continued for many years. It's to today, as a matter of fact, and it continues today. But it wasn't just the federal government, it was also the provincial governments who were all doing it at the same time. And that's why things like education, you know, when I was a young man going into university at 19 years old or whatever, 18 years old, a full year of classes was about $600. Yeah. That's how good our education system used to be. And even though it was so long ago, it wasn't a lot of money back then. I could have worked a part-time job in the summertime as a young man and paid for my own education without asking my parents. Okay. Yeah. Today, that's impossible. Okay. So because we privatized, we instead of taking, economy of scale, instead of taking money from all of us and then using it for all of our benefit, we said, no, we're going to give it to these private entities, and then you have to pay. So that happened in education. It happened in healthcare. Look at in Ontario, when you go to the MTO, do you know what the MTO is? The Ministry of Transportation, Ontario, to go get your license. You remember? When you got to go renew your license or go get new license plates, that used to be run by us, the public. But we now, we privatize that. So there are people who own those. We don't own them. It's not government. It's actually some person who owns it and is making money off of it, which is, in logical terms, it's not very smart. I'm a business person. I own a business. I would never make that move if I were the boss of the government because it's not in our best interest. It's not in the business's best interest to do that, because it's obviously going to cost more and you lose control, right? Now, for us, for garbage, for example, in Toronto, I'll give you an example. In Toronto, we privatized half of our garbage collection in Ontario. And I think in Markham, it's all privatized, but in Toronto, we privatized half of it. Guess what? When we want to change our system, if we want to go from recycling this to maybe 2 recycling boxes or whatever, anything we want to change, guess who has to pay for it? The public has to pay for it, not the private company who's responsible for it. We still have to pay for it. Just like with the hospital, what's going on right now with privatizing hospital surgeries, these private for-profit hospitals, guess who's building them? You and I, with our money. We're building these hospitals just to hand it over to a private company to make money. Does that make sense?
No.
I don't know. I mean, as a business person, I would never do that to my business, or if you want to call government business. But you see, that also came into play, believe it or not, in Harper days. He brought in something called new management. Okay, this is a way of all of our public institutions are now going to manage those institutions differently. Run it like a business. That's what he said. We're going to run all these public institutions like a business because businesses are way more efficient, right? However, what he forgot was that public services aren't a business. They're not there to make money. They're there to deliver services to us, right? So what ended up happening was for example, our hospitals, instead of collaborating with one another, they became competitors, okay? And when you become competitors, you don't want to share. So that means there's 2 hospitals on University Avenue in Toronto that are doing the exact same research, okay? But they don't want to share information with one another. So both of them, it takes them longer to come up with a solution because they're not talking to each other because it's competitive now. You're running like a business. You don't want to tell your competitors your inside ideas or whatever. So that happened during the Harper days, and it's filled every one of our institutions now, whether it's schools, whether it's education, transportation, housing, whatever, it's everywhere. So that's another area of discussion that's all on its own that we could talk about. But I know it's late, and this was great. I really enjoyed talking to you all. I'm going to try and get rid of this here. Stop sharing. Oh, there we go. And I don't know does anyone have a last, discussion, anything that you want to talk about, or even to help us, like if we were to do this again, the next session, you have this kind of general understanding of the structures of Canada. So what would be what would you want to see next? Anyone?
Well, this group of people looks like they are quite shy.
Well,
What we are going to do is that we are going to email from Eventbrite the people that had joined, actually who had registered, because I can't see whether everybody registered had actually joined. But regardless, we'll have the video go on YouTube later on anyway. So whoever wants to review it, they can review it. And if you have any suggestion, any question or anything, you can actually send email to us. How's that?
Okay.
Did you want to say something, Anita?
Oh yeah. It seems yeah, it's our concern how government spend the money, because it's our money actually, and then it seems well, they spend the money for
就係襲擊受輕傷，警方拘捕咗一個人，並且展開調查。
well,
Oh, once. Sorry, you cut out there, Anita. I'm sorry.
Government spend money for not for the public interest, but it seems they spend it in what, wrong place, and then so do they have to be audited by independent party to make sure that they spend our money wisely?
That's a great question. That is an excellent question. And we do have someone called an Auditor General who does overlook and advise the public on what the government is doing. We also have what's called an Integrity Commissioner. An Integrity Commissioner says whether what they're doing is legal or illegal or right or wrong. That's, so right now, I don't know if everybody knows about the green belt, what's happening with the green belt, building housing on some of the best farmland in Ontario, some of the best farmland in North America. But what is happening right now is our Integrity Commissioner and our Auditor General are both independently investigating the Ford government and why he's making this decision, because it's clearly not in the best interest of all of us, but yet he's doing this. I think what you're talking about is a discussion about voting systems and representation. So Canada, as I mentioned earlier, has one of the oldest voting systems in the world, called First Past the Post. And it is a big problem, in my opinion, because we don't get fair representation. So I'll give to you an example with Ford in the last election. Because only 46% of us voted in the last election, that means 54% did not. All Ford needed to get elected was 18% of the electorate. Okay, he only attracted 18% of the votes, all the votes that were out there, and he got 100% of power. So when you only have 18% of the vote, that means there is 72% of people who have absolutely no representation in government at all. And so that's why I believe that this is probably the most important discussion that we can have as not just Ontarians, but as Canadians, is how our voting system works and all the other options that are available. So this is definitely going to be something we're going to talk about in further discussions, further forums, because both Mimi and myself both believe that it's imperative that we know this stuff.
Let me actually visualize that, what it really means with what Nick just said. 54% of people voted. So let's say this room, we have now 11 people, right? So 11 of us, let's say we are the 100%, and only half of us, slightly half of us actually voted. So 6 of us actually voted. But then at the same time, what Ford actually got is just 2 out of the 6 people voted for him. And he got into the seat and decide everything for us.
He has 100% power. Yes.
That's right. So what do you think? You think the 2 people who actually voted represented you and me at the same time? Or do you think the other 9 people needs to have their voice somewhere, somehow.
Well, the thing is, I guess most Canadians are so frustrated about our system. No matter what government that we vote for, the outcome is going to be the same.
Mhm.
Well, look at what we had with Liberal before, like we lost a lot of money, and now with Ford. And I can't see that we are going anywhere at all.
And that's exactly why we need to review the system itself, because the system is
Mhm.
broken.
That's right. Can't agree more. I mean, and it is
So,
all about
we-
accountability and transparency. Those are the two things that we lack, right? We don't have
First
any
screen, can you
account.
show it again?
I'm
The
sorry?
first screen. You know, just now the first screen the part federal and promotion. I like that page again. Can you show it to me?
Yes, for sure. Where are we?
Sorry,
Share screen.
I forgot to take a photo.
That's okay.
Just the one you
Uh,
just closed down.
No, did
yeah,
Mimi say
sure.
that you will email us the presentations to us?
Yeah, this one. Yeah, this one here. Okay.
This one, the
Are you
federal.
going to email us? Yeah.
I'm
Are you
sorry.
going to email
What?
us? Yeah, that's
Oh,
fine.
would you
Are
like
you going
this?
to email to
Sure.
us? Yeah.
This is
yes. Are you going to email to us the one
okay.
all the participants?
I just sure we can. This I don't mind. This is just to let you know. This is general. Okay, so it's missing
Yeah,
stuff
general.
here. Yeah, there's things missing
thank you.
here. So you know, it's important that you know that. I don't want you to go away thinking that this is all everything. I just broke it down to try and make it easy to understand for the
Yeah,
for the
that's why
first
we
time.
at least know the general and basics. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay, you're
Yeah,
welcome.
the general
That's great.
information. Yeah, that's good. And then you will email to us this workshop, right? When
Yeah,
you
well-
present it.
The workshop
Recorded.
itself is going to be on YouTube. Once it's on
Yes.
YouTube, I can do an email blast and tell you guys that it's on YouTube.
Okay, thank you. Are we nearly finished? It's getting late. I'm so tired. Sorry.
Well,
a
you know what?
senior,
Thank
yeah.
you so much. You know what? I have to tell
Okay,
you
thank
that
you.
you know, if I could say one more thing, I'm just really excited that you came to this because I believe strongly that education and knowledge is power. And it makes me feel amazing that so many of you want to know this stuff because you know, I don't know, you know, I have a business in Markham, and I know many of you may be immigrants, you know, first generation immigrants, and I believe that Canadians don't have this knowledge. People who've been here many years, many generations don't have this knowledge. And if we did, then we can work together to make all of our lives better. Because as we talked about in Touched, we are lacking in representation in our government, and until we get it, I don't think we're going to improve. You know, our standard of living, it peaked in Canada in the 80s, and since the 80s, it's diminishing. I don't want it to get for my children to a point where it's not that good at any. You know, I want a functioning country that reflects our values, because we care about each other. That's why we have public services, right? That's why we have social services. We care about each other. We don't want to see people sleeping on the streets, living on the streets, and yet those numbers continue to climb every year after year after year. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for being a part of this, because it really gives me hope that that we can really have a brighter future together. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks for the
Thank
info.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Good night. Okay.
Good night.
Thanks for the information. Yeah. Good night.
Okay.